Hello and welcome, everyone. We are so honored to have so many beautiful faces and names on this informational OWL webinar. My name is Monica Cordova, she, her, hers. I'm coming to you from Albuquerque, New Mexico. I am the executive director at the Funders Collaborative on Youth Organizing, and it's just a joy to be here with you all and begin to share more about the second cohort of OWL. We're going to start by launching a poll. So we always just like to get a better sense of who's in the room. So Jen, if you don't mind launching the poll, and folks, if you don't mind just taking a second to fill it out, we'll share the results in a second. But today we're going to have an opportunity to share both, what you'll need to know about applying for OWL, and also just share some stories for the lessons we've learned from the first cohort. We really feel it's a great opportunity to engage with a diverse set of youth organizing groups, intergenerational organizations, and are really eager to launch this second cohort and have an amazing staff, some of which you all know for many, many years, and some of her newer coming in that we're really have really worked hard to get us where we're at. And so if you haven't done the poll, please take just a couple minutes to do that, and then we can share back to you who else is in the room. There'll also be time for you all to ask questions towards the end, and so feel free to either keep those in mind, drop them in the chat when they come to you. We also have somebody keeping an eye on the chat. We want to make sure that you have all the information you need leaving this webinar to successfully apply for the Organizing to Win Lab. I'll start next after we share the poll results by just sharing a little bit more about FCYO and who we are, where we've come. And so Jen, if you don't mind sharing the poll results. So it looks like we have the large majority of you who are youth organizers. Yay. Let's give it up for the youth organizers. And then a few others that are allies, partners, friends. As is the usual, we have a good showing from the Northeast in California. That's certainly some of our base, but excited to see folks from all across the country, the Midwest. Shout outs to the Southwest, Southeast. We really want more folks in the South and Southeast, so encourage your friends to apply from other organizations as well. And then your fall vibes. Fall is my favorite season. Cozy sweaters and socks is something I align with. I don't know if I'm going to offend anybody with this, but I am not about the pumpkin spice. We can have a pumpkin spice debate later. Also ready for Halloween. Looks like a lot of us are ready for Halloween. What are folks' costumes? Feel free to drop that in the chat. We're about community here, so love some creative ideas. We're going to have a little costume party later on in October. So maybe some people on our staff who aren't going to dress up might get some ideas. So Jen, if you'll start to share the slides, I'll share a little bit more about FCYO. I think, many of you have rocked with us before in the past and have followed our work, our history. But for those of you that are less familiar, FCYO, the Funders Collaborative on Youth Organizing, has been around for 22 years now. And we really got started, from a group of funders who were noticing the powerful work that young people were doing in communities, and wanted to find a way to continue to sustain that work. So what we currently do, one, we're a collective of both funders and youth organizers. And so that's something that we see as a part of our special sauce, our connection to both the field of philanthropy and our connection to the youth organizing field. And so these are some of the key areas of the work that we do. We, most certainly want to move resources to organizations, youth-led intergenerational organizations that are prioritizing the leadership of young people, BIPOC young people, queer and trans young people. And so that's one of our big goals, is to raise more money to go to the ground and for funders to fund you directly. That will ensure the stability and the longevity of your work. Two, increasingly, it feels like capacity building is not necessarily the right word for what we do anymore. We really do feel like our work is very movement aligned. And so we want to create a space for organizers to build their skills, to be vulnerable and honest, to get strategic political education that you may or may not have access to in other spaces. And so that has really become a strong part that is really integrated into all of our grant making. Of course, we know that building the field is about connecting organizations. Organizing is about relationship building. And so we want to be a space that is interconnecting organizations cross issue, cross geography, cross membership or constituency, to make sure that we're building a strong and stable and interconnected field, and that you all are able to learn from each other and grow your work because of it. Sort of connected to, the moving of the resources is organizing funders. We really, we pulled together research, we put out field scans, case studies, hold funder briefs, because that is a part of our strategy for moving more funders to understand the important and critical role young people play in social movements, and then helping them to think about how their funding strategies and streams can really align with and integrate young people into them. And so we do that in some of the ways that I named prior. And then, I already talked about the building knowledge. So yeah, just sharing the work, sharing the good work that's out there, and making sure that what you're doing in your local community has an opportunity to get amplified. Next slide. So maybe you're asking, how did we get to the Organizing to Win Lab? Maybe you're not, but I'm going to tell you. So about 5 or 6 years ago, FCYO really did the work. Some of the work that we're going to ask you all to do in the Organizing to Win Lab, which was assess ourselves, assess the role we played in the youth organizing ecosystem, and clarify how we can actually better serve and show up for the field. And so we redeveloped our theory of change, which actually laid some conditions around our assessments of the moment, our definition of power, and then how our work really leans into our specialness, the ways in which we can connect and build with the field, because we have a long history and trusted relationships, and the ways we can move funders. And from that, we began to have really important and conversations with organizers that were setting off some light bulbs for us. One, groups are telling us that they didn't, they were winning policy wins, but maybe they weren't getting implemented like they needed to be or thought they would. Maybe they weren't getting implemented at all, or like many of you who might be working on place-free schools right now, or they got implemented and then rolled back. And so there was this real question of, how do we build power? And we wanted to begin to experiment with, just like we, are going to be encouraging organizations to experiment and try new things on, we also began to do that. And so we developed Pipelines to Power. It was a cohort of 15 organizations that began to grapple with the question of what it means to build meaningful power in this moment. We learned some lessons, and we began to develop what we call the Power Twin framework. But that really got more concrete after the next cohort, which was the Youth Power Labs. This didn't have any grant dollars, because unlike this moment where every funder is throwing around the words power building, and maybe a lot don't know what those words mean, there was not a lot of money or resources for power building. So we put together a capacity building program, and 130 organizations applied for the Youth Power Labs, and it didn't have any grant making dollars tied to it, which led us to really kind of, again, have another aha moment where we knew the field was really eager to grapple with these questions and dig in with each other. From that, we really developed our points of alignment, which were happening in partnership with organizers on the ground. So we pulled together a leadership team of youth organizers from across the country that helped us assess the field and understand where were some of the gaps and where were some of the opportunities, and how could FCYO actually play a stronger role in filling some of those gaps. And they were about a lot of what came up was reinvesting in organizing. How are we reinvesting in our understanding of our organizing strategies? How are we really assessing the work and understanding the intersections of racial capitalism, patriarchy, and the kind of destruction of our ecological systems, and then working towards building a more just and equitable society. And then we are still in the middle of really sharpening our Power Twin framework, which Christopher June will talk about later. But that eventually led, all of those experiments really, and information gathering led us to build the GenPower Labs, which is our 3-tier grant making program that you'll hear more about in a minute. Next slide. So here are some of the basic assumptions that those were grounded in. One, we really felt like this moment, every movement moment, I think for those that are in it feels really important and like challenging, and it's really impacting our communities. But given all that's happened over the last 40 years, and then really in recent history, the last like 3 to 5 years, we're in a really pivotal moment. And if we don't get our organizing act together, we could go towards more fear and repression instead of liberation. And we fundamentally believe that young people have a role to play in building the types of movements that will spark and ignite the type of change that we need in this country to really transform systems. But to address those, the challenges that we're facing, youth organizing has to reach a new level of power. The field has grown tremendously over the last 20, 25 years, and we've learned so much, and we've seen organizations just shine and their strategies go bigger. And we also know that the moment is unlike any other, and we need to keep a sharp edge on our organizing. So the Power to Win framework, again, which you'll hear a little bit more about, starts with our definition of power, which is to transform economic and social conditions. And then through that, we really feel like youth organizing must look at their base building strategies and how we're thinking about scale. And so scale doesn't necessarily mean that every organization is going to be organizing thousands of people, but it does mean how are you assessing the types of transformation that you want to move, and then building the base and the scale to actually get there. That we need to be developing broad-based strategic alliances. So any one organization isn't going to do it alone. We're going to do it together. And so it's not just about connecting to other youth-led organizations or intergenerational organizations that have young people, but how are we building strategic and tactical alliances with other folks that have a common interest and moving a particular thing in our communities to help transform conditions. And then, of course, like elevating public narratives. A lot of folks talk about how we're shifting the kind of day-to-day conversations of folks, how we're shifting what is valued in society, and that all has to be integrated into an organizing strategy. In and of itself won't really change our society. And so these are some of the foundational pieces that have led us to be excited about this second cohort of the Organizing to Win Lab. And to go a little bit deeper, I'm going to hand it off to Christopher June. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you, Monica. My name is Christopher June. I use they and she pronouns, and I'm the program director here at FCYO. And one of the things that we came up against was, like, how do we take our theory of change and all this analysis about the moment? How do we take this analysis about sort of like the necessity of not just campaign wins, but structural transformation? How do we take that and turn that into capacities that we could actually support organizations in building? And so alongside partners in the field, we're developing the Power to Win framework, as we call it, which is really meant to help us sort of serve as a North Star, as an anchor for what are the capacities we are trying to build in the field that we think develop the sorts of organizations and movement-wide capacities that allow youth organizing to engage in a movement for structural transformation. Because we know no one organization or even one sector or coalition is going to single-handedly win what needs to be won in this moment. But we want to be able to help support building organizations who can be a part of that fight. And given the growth edges Monica named and our times in the field, we had an assessment of some of those growth edges, but also some of the things necessary to build. So the framework is really 4 key pillars, each which has a set of sort of like key capacities within it and practices. So analysis and long-term vision is the first pillar, transformative leadership development the second, organizing for power the third, and 4, assessment and experimentation. So analysis and long-term vision, what are you fighting for? And how do you understand sort of like the system you are up against to make that vision happen? And then also, how do you situate your short-term work? I don't know if y'all can hear that bird in my background, but it is going wild. How do you, your short-term campaign work, how do you situate that within a long-term power-building fight to get towards the structural transformation in line with your vision? Transformative leadership development, we think that it's really necessary for organizations to develop both their leaders and members in the political or strategic skills, the practical organizing skills, the hard skills, and the social emotional skills necessary to take on this work in this period. Organizing for power, running campaigns, building power, building base at a meaningful scale, and analyzing what that means for your particular terrain, and assessment and experimentation. We're going to all need to consistently not only look at our own practices and judge them against shared metrics, but also engage in collective experiments where we test, analyze, and retest as we try and do something that hasn't been done, which is transform the structure of this society. Can go to the next slide, Jen. And so, an outcome for us is that youth organizing groups at the end of the GenPower Labs are better positioned to conduct regular assessments of their work, to measure progress towards long-term strategic goals. So not just short-term campaign work, but are we moving towards our long-term agenda? Carrying out strategy in line with both a thorough power analysis of the moment, of their particular terrain of struggle. The struggle of an organization in Rhode Island and California may have some similarities, but also just scale differences. And also a long-term agenda that houses their work within structural transformation. Organizations are able to build meaningful power through strategic alliances, through their base building work, and through shifting public narratives. And organizations develop young leaders who can play long-term roles in intergenerational social movements. So we've seen and we've heard often groups talk about young folks aging out of their organizations and then sort of having nowhere to be housed. And we really want to be building lifelong political workers, which means both our inner organization infrastructure and also the capacities we're building for young people. And each of the, yeah, thank you. So we've essentially sort of thought about in each of the 3 tiers. So there's 3 tiers of the GenPower Labs, different entry points, and we'll talk about each of those in a second. What capacities sort of can build on each other moving from tier to tier to get to organizations who can do the things we just talked about. So it's a capacity building program, as Monica said. It's also so much more. Started to think about it as an organizing project for organizers to support organizations in developing their long-term strategies and the capacities necessary to take those on. It's grounded in peer learning, so groups will be able to assess organizing models to align strategies, base building, and leadership development models. This doesn't mean that we're asking groups to campaign together per se, but to be in shared work that requires being able to share your assessments of your own work, hear others, and also sharpen together. And so each tier is a grant-making program with different time commitments, different grant dollars, different cohort sizes, and a different set of capacities that they're trying to build to stack onto each other to get to where we're trying to go to. So next slide. OWL, we're going to spend a bunch of time talking about, so we don't have to dive into that one, but it's our first tier, 1-year grant-making initiative and the entry point into the GenPower Labs. And supports a broad range of youth organizing groups addressing the pressing issues of the moment. So as Monica said, police-free schools, environmental justice, racial justice, all sorts of things that young people are involved in organizing with. Next slide. Level Up Lab is our second tier, which launched this year. It's a 2-year grant-making initiative. And so really it's working on the intersection of base building, which is one of the organizing for power capacities, and transformative leadership development, and really trying to increase groups' capacities for building member organizers, member leaders, member strategists, and building sustainable organizations who can carry that out. So deep sort of like practice shifts, folks are identifying where their practices can grow in those capacities, and then we're going to collectively be testing those shifts. And you can go to the next slide, Praxis for Power 10. And then our third tier, this time last year, this first bullet said currently in design phase. We have made it through the design phase with organizations and are currently in the implementation phase, which means that 10 organizations are in a small 3-year grant-making cohort initiative where we'll be collaborating on actually a shared hypothesis or shared practice shift. So in Level Up Lab, groups are identifying their individual shift, In Praxis for Power, they actually designed a collective practice shift around leadership development, around base building, and around tactical and strategical alliances, which is really thinking about who do we need in the short term and who do we need to build with long term. So they'll be engaging in that together in similar things as Level Up Lab around developing member organizers, member leaders, but also developing that long-term strategic orientation. So they'll be doing shared learning and practice to determine sort of like best movement-wide practices and are most responsible for sort of playing a leadership role within the GenPower Labs. Next slide. So yeah, in short, Organizing to Win Lab, OWL, is the first tier. It's a 1-year grant-making initiative, and OWL 1 was 40 organizations, and OWL 2 and 3 will be somewhere between 25 and 40. The Level Up Lab, between 15 and 20 organizations, 2 years, second tier, and Praxis for Power, or P for P, tier 3, 3 years, 10 to 15 organizations. So if you hear a shorthand, OWL, LUL, and P for P are the ways we sometimes shorthand those 3 tiers within the GenPower Labs. And I'm going to kick it on over to JMO, my co-pilot in the GenPower Labs, who's going to talk to us about OWL.
I love it, co-pilot. Hi everyone, Jennifer Maldonado. I go by JMO, she, her pronouns. I am the program manager at FCYO, and I oversee OWL, the Organizing to Win Lab. And if you have any OWL puns, please feel free to throw them in the chat. I love a good laugh because OWL is a really cute name, I would say. But I'm really gonna go over what entails, what details about OWL to share with folks so that you all are best informed around the commitment should you be accepted into the second cohort. Next slide, Jen. So a quick overview, like Christopher June said, 1 year, it's an entry level. We're accepting 25 organizations with a grant amount of $35,000, and that's for your general operations. We're accepting organizations that work on a variety of issues. So this is not an issue-based cohort. Y'all could come in working on as many issues as you want. And in the application, we also ask, what issues are you working on in your communities? And this is really intended for organizations who are poised to assess their power building strategies and connect with other organizations to learn about their power building strategies. And so we're really excited to root this also in social political sessions, or what we call strategic education sessions. And those sessions are informed by curriculum that was crafted by the Grassroots Power Project, GPP. So they definitely helped us in sharpening also our analysis, OWL analysis, and thinking about how to create a collective orientation to assessing the last 40 years and the conditions we're up against, or racial capitalism, or just other political frameworks to strengthen our strategic analysis, both as organizers and as organizations. Next slide, please. And to really understand how this happens is by this really simplistic graphic of the major components of OWL. So we'll have strategic education sessions that are rooted in political education, its curriculum, its workshop status with conversation and facilitators. And then we'll also introduce an organizational assessment task. So kind of like homework, but not, it's actually more reflective. And folks take back that assessment, that organizational assessment task to their individual organizations and really talk to their membership, to their leadership, the folks driving their strategies, the folks building the power building strategies, the folks leading the campaign, guiding the campaign, to answer a set of questions. And these questions are very much rooted in reflection, in clarifying, and also grappling. The previous OWL cohort would share that a lot came up for me and my organization, but it was really good conversations that we hadn't had before. And other groups were sharing that this is very different than evaluation for us because we're asking questions about strategy and we didn't know what questions to ask about strategy. So those are kind of the questions folks are going to walk away with to grapple with their organization, because it creates space for aha moments, is what we're referring to them. Those moments of like, that's maybe what we need to shift, or that's where, you know, maybe this is our growth edge, or this is where we're the strongest, or now we're leaning into this more deeply in our program work. So the assessment, the organizational assessment tasks is really for you all. And also you bring that back to the cohort. You get to talk to other organizations that also did the same organizational task. And you get to really, you know, debrief with them in these debrief sessions. And we'll have folks come in and share some of their reflections, you know, folks who have been in the movement for years. We have like guest speakers, and we'll have folks just sharing what has come up with them in their organization in trying to build meaningful power in their community. So it's very dialectical. It's very much honest, vulnerable, grappling, non-judgmental space. And we typically say and reiterate in a lot of our sessions, joy and rigor, that this is both a process that really grounds folks in understanding like our collective power for the world we're trying to build, and that it's rigorous and that we're going to do it together. And so that's really the culture that we try to create by facilitating these three components throughout the cohort. Next slide. And so just really quickly, you know, at the end of OWL, we hope that folks walk away, you know, really feeling an increase of capacity for long-term strategy. So like Christopher June said, around the first pillar for the Power to Win framework, we're looking at we're assessing our own analysis of our long-term vision. Like how do you all determine your long-term vision? What are the root causes? How are you determining what campaigns to take on to get to your long-term vision? So those are really some of the capacity buildings that we try to hone in on in the questions that then translate to how we campaign build in our organization. So that's definitely something that folks walk away with after coming out of OWL. And also of collective understanding of conditions. Like I said, the curriculum is informed through our partnership with GPP. It's definitely growing curriculum, and a lot of organizers even took that back to their membership or are popularizing it, because we really understand that a lot of possibility is created when there's like a collective orientation to the conditions that we're up against. And so we really want folks to build that orientation throughout OWL. I think there's 2 more bubbles, Jen. I'm not sure. Yeah, there you go. You could click through them. So who needs to, like, what is the commitment of being part of OWL? So it's two representatives from each organization. 1 representative needs to be of senior leadership. So whether this is the executive director, the organizing director, the lead organizer, I'll go over a minute as to why. And then the other representative should be a youth organizer, an organizer, you know, the intergenerational organizer, a key staff member, a leader. Reason being is because the senior leadership will be tasked to really guide the organizational tasks that we'll be giving you all. So, and this is key because what we've learned in previous cohorts that FCYO has run is that organizers will come and participate in these amazing cohorts and then try to take it back to their org, and then they feel a little stuck, like, oh, I need everything you just, you know, explained to me, because now I need to show the senior leadership or the board so that we could have these like a connected moment of what I just learned and what you know, how this could impact our organization structure or capacity or direction. And so we've definitely felt that having someone of senior leadership can support the organizers, both experience, but also the collective understanding of their organization, and building, you know, a culture of assessment making and building a culture of really taking back what they've learned from this cohort to the whole organization. So we just don't want it to stay with the 2 representatives or even the 1 representative. We really want this to go back to your org. whoever the org is comprised of, right? The senior leadership, if your board of directors are really engaged in the day-to-day work, it's really the organizational assessments is for you all. And so having that sense of responsibility from the senior leadership and the organizer is very key to the success of y'all's participation in OWL. In terms of time commitment, it's 6 to 8 virtual sessions that range about 2 to 3 hours. Don't get scared about the 3 hours. They actually go by really quick, and we do take breaks. And also we definitely craft in time for discussion. So breakout groups, facilitation, reflection, because we really want folks to have a pause, but also be able to engage in the curriculum and also the work, bring in the work that they're doing to reflect. So the 2 to 3 hours, don't get scared of that number per se. Sometimes it's 2, sometimes it's 3. We'll have readings, we'll have videos that we'll send out. It's not every session, but these readings and videos just support more of our rigor, more of the study. And those sessions are recorded. The debrief sessions are half recorded because the other half is, getting into our small groups and grappling with the organizational assessments and what's come up for us. There's 3 organizational assessments. Folks will have time in between those organizational assessments to coordinate with their folks at their individual organizations, to have a meeting, to facilitate. People will have a facilitator's guide to really walk folks through the questions. So there'll be 3 that folks have to complete. And on average, if you average like all the time commitment, it averages out to about 20 to 30 hours spent doing our work. And that's within, the 12 months of the program. Oh, great question. Okay, I see some questions in the chat. 2 participants max. I think some orgs have invited other participants. We're generally open to that because some organizations are like, oh, we have an organizer, then this will be really good for them to learn some of the, political education you all are offering. 2 are max. I think 3 is okay. Last cohort we did do 3. The main concern is for like a facilitator, it's like ratio, like facilitator to cohort ratio. But if you have like 3 folks that you're like, I really would like this youth organizer, as long as there's a senior, someone of senior leadership, because again, it's the responsibility to the cohort and to the organization of completing those organizational tasks. And so if there's a senior leadership and 2 youth organizers, that's fine. We could definitely have some communication for the organizations that really want that, should y'all be accepted. But in traditional school days, the sessions, the scheduling will most likely, because organizations are applying from across the country. So we typically have the sessions in Pacific time, like a little earlier, and then in East Coast time, it lands a little later. So we try to meet folks, like the time struggle of folks' capacity and schedule. So definitely, I don't think so, because because of the time difference, folks who are traditionally in the schooling between 8 and 3, whatever coastal time you are, or southern time you are, time zone you are, it may not match up. But definitely we'll have the schedule once we have orientation next year. If you're transitioning leaders, there's a commitment that folks will, the organization has to communicate that to FCYO. So there will be check-ins, transitioning the sessions will be recorded. So if there's a transition, that person can, catch up in a sense, so that they understand like where we're at in the trajectory of the cohort. But definitely there has to be some communication if there's a transition of leaders, which we've experienced in the last cohort as well. Okay, I'm going to move us forward just one more, and then I'll keep answering questions as we go. Can you click on the next slide, Jen? Okay. So just really quickly, what we cannot fund. So FCYO is fiscally sponsored by Bend the Arc. And so we also, have obligations, expectations, responsibilities as a 501c3 being fiscally sponsored. So this project, OWL will not fund organizations that do direct social services. And we've gotten this question of like, what do we consider direct social services? So if there's an organization that is just offering services, like say, for example, and I don't know why this is on the top of my head, just like counseling, but there's no organizing model in how to address, the root causes of the trauma in terms of like what we're responding to, then, we really want, because the cohort will go over power building strategies. So we really want organizations that are already familiar or already experimenting or getting their feet wet with power building and base building, because a lot of the questions will be about that. It won't be about direct social services. It won't be about like how to strengthen our outreach to service more folks. It's really more on the spectrum of power building. So that's why that question, we just want to be very clear that we're looking for organizations that are experimenting, getting their feet wet with power building, with base building, because the majority of the cohort will be talking about those strategies and grappling with those strategies. We cannot fund publications, reports, workshops like media, research, litigation. We cannot fund individuals. Organizations located outside of the United States, we do know that we can, and correct me if I'm wrong, Monica, we can fund organizations in Puerto Rico. And so shout out to Puerto Rico. I know they're going through a really tough time right now, but I believe we can, correct me if I'm wrong, Monica. And then we cannot fund, the funds cannot go towards like specific lobbying or supporting legislation, and so forth. And so we're really looking for organizations that are 501c3 or fiscally, have a fiscal agent, power building, base building. And we're really looking to give preference to Black-led, Indigenous-led, because we know that they've been historically underfunded, and also organizations located in underfunded regions such as the South, Southeast, like Midwest. So folks that haven't had a robust like funder organizing in their state or community. We definitely want new organizations as well that have never rocked with FCYO or who are, were established in the past, 5-ish years that are practicing power building and base building. We definitely welcome folks because this is a very entry level cohort. So we definitely want to make sure that we're building a cohort that's conducive to everyone's learning. I believe there's one more bubble, Jen. Okay, here's the timeline. So the request for proposals is out, and today's the webinar. On the 31st, so on Halloween, on All Hallows Eve, is the due dates, so the deadline for the proposals. The time exactly is like 11:59 Pacific time, and that translates different to like Eastern time. And then there's like a buffer, right? We'll be reviewing our selection committee. Our selection committee is made up of our, a staff, board members, and also organizations from the field. We'll review all the applications and we'll have announcements ready, January, February, because we're coming up against a holiday block. So we know it's kind of hard to schedule folks, but we hope to have a really smooth and seamless process, with the orientation starting next year in February. So during the orientation, we'll go over scheduling, expectations, more getting to know each other, the program, timeline, right? So when to expect the sessions, the facilitators, all that. So once you get into the cohort, you get more of the robust details of the orientation of what's to come in the year together. And if folks have never experienced SurveyMonkey, it could be like a little bit of a hit or miss, because SurveyMonkey can be very tedious. And so we'll drop in the chat this link. This goes to our profile with SurveyMonkey, and it's the direct application for OWL. And it'll have all the details that I also reviewed here in more depth. If folks want to read the full RFP, it has the information of your organization And then it goes into the narrative questions that I will go over right in a bit. And then it's uploading documents. Some of the documents are like your board of directors, like name of board of directors, some of it's financial documents. This is just for us to keep on our records, and also because we're fiscally sponsored, we just get it checked by our fiscal sponsor. Next slide, Jen. So these are the narrative questions. There are 4 questions, and we really like to share with folks that these questions are not so much to judge folks' wins or quote unquote failures. As you might have noticed, this is our experiment as well. That's why we call them labs. And so here we're experimenting. We're very much leaning into what is made possible when XYZ. And so we know that organizations who are making these assessments in relationship to the strategic education we'll be offering creates pathways, creates openings, right? It creates those aha moments. And as part of our commitment to making assessments, FCYO is using these questions not to judge y'all's work, right? It's more to hear about how you all reflect. So the more vulnerable you are in answering these questions, the more insight you give us as to yes, this is the organization that is, ready to assess, ready to be vulnerable, ready to grapple, because that is exactly what this cohort is going to be on the premises of, right? The rigor and joy. And so we're really looking for orgs that are going to be honest, open, reflective, and please don't see us as a traditional funder where you need a boost, you need to bolster your chest. We're definitely looking for folks that are grounded in honesty and really grappling with certain questions. So the first question is around your vision and your mission. What are the root causes of the issues your organization is challenging? So if folks, and some folks probably have given this workshop with their young people, like the iceberg, right? We see the top of the iceberg, and that's kind of the conditions that we're experiencing. And below the water level, it's a bigger iceberg because it's the root causes and what is causing those conditions, right? So what is at the root that is perpetuating these conditions to reoccur, and how is your organization challenging those root causes? The second question, what does your organization do to build power necessary to achieve your vision? So by telling us your vision or your mission, how are you all building the power? How are you all shifting the social, political, economic conditions in your community to reach that vision? What is your organizational practice getting in the way of your ability to build that power? So basically, what are your challenges? What are you all being challenged with in order to build that power? Or to build that meaningful power to shift those conditions, to achieve your vision. So basically, what are the roadblocks? Describe a time when your organization reflected on your work and realized you needed to make a pivot, do things differently. What was the process like? What important lessons did your organization learn? As you might know, OWL is going to be really grounded in assessment making. And so we'd like to know, at what point did your organization need to pivot? Or what was the process in which you needed to realize, hey, this campaign is going this way. We thought it was going to go that way. How do we pivot from this now shifting landscape? And how do we do that internally as an org or with our membership? This is definitely a time to story tell. And invite us in as to how your organization makes assessments. For number 4, who will be your organizational representatives? What programmatic and campaign work do they run? Why do you think they make sense to participate in the OWL cohort? We are committed to the field, and we definitely hope that you all are committed to this cohort, because it's going to be a lot of reflection, a lot of in-depth conversation. And so we would like to know, who are you sending? And what work do they work on, and why do you think they, them as a representative should come and be part of the cohort? So it's learning a little bit more. Awesome. And Kel, if you want to help me with any of the questions, let me know. I know you've been chat monitor.
Yeah, JMO, the most recent one is asking about a group that works internationally for racial with climate justice that's located in the US but does international work and youth organizing. Is that applicable to OWL? So folks asking both about working outside of the US but being housed within.
Yeah, let me pass it to Monica. I've never gotten that question before.
I mean, so one, we're a US based funder. We absolutely support and think that both having a global analysis and working internationally is important. But the resources that we move are for things that are happening within the United States or in US territories. So if you are doing organizing in the US and you then want to apply for the work that you're doing within the US, then yes, please do so.
Cool, thank you, Monica. I think the next one was opportunities to meet in person. Maybe, I think we are definitely doing, flexing our funder donation arm, and definitely it's a maybe. Currently, right now, all of the sessions are virtual. The previous cohort was all virtual, and that's just due to the pandemic. And also layering in that we're still in a pandemic amongst other epidemics that are occurring. So we definitely had to reevaluate how we convene, because we do convene a lot of organizations. So it is a possibility. We, haven't really determined if there will be an in-person opportunity, but we definitely will know that by the end of the year, early next year for the cohort. This cohort again is 25 organizations. And so also thinking about some in-person time. I know I get Zoom fatigue. So definitely appreciate that question as well. And so that will be a TBD, to be determined. And then let me check for more questions.
It wasn't a direct question, JMO, but someone did raise a question around an intergenerational organization with a youth program. I'm not sure if you went over, a youth organization, an intergenerational organization, the different forms that are encouraged to apply.
Yeah, intergenerational. Oh, I see Kalia coming in. Intergenerational are encouraged to apply. We typically have identified young person, young adult to the age of 25. And so definitely intergenerational youth-led orgs are welcome to apply. Any issue, right? So it's not issue based. And so yeah, intergenerational is definitely welcome to apply. There is a question in the application that will ask how much funding is allocated to your youth program. And so if you're intergenerational, it's just really teasing apart the budget in a sense, how much your organization allocates for your youth program. So if you have any questions about the RFP, the kind of demographic questions, feel free to reach out for any clarification that you might need, especially for intergenerational orgs. Anything to add, Monica or Christopher June?
I just dropped our definition for youth organizing. So we certainly know I come from an intergenerational organization. We know and value that work. And we also want to make sure that young people have leadership and decision-making power within that work. So dropped our definition of youth organizing for folks to take a look at.
Thank you, Monica. I see Kalia Harris is in the house, so definitely want to give everyone an insight to an OWL alum. Kalia was definitely really active the last cohort, and so my eyes light up because so much was made possible with their organization because of their commitment to OWL. And so first off, I'd love the pleasure of welcoming and introducing Kalia Harris, she, her pronouns. She is the executive director of the Virginia Student Power Network. And VSPN is a statewide group that is supporting organizing young people and youth organizations on and off college campuses throughout the state of Virginia. And after graduating from George Mason University, she moved back to her hometown in Richmond, Virginia, where she is also a co-host of an award-winning podcast. So I have a super professional here, radio show talk host called Race Capital. Kalia deeply enjoys the work that she does in building power with young people across the state, as well as playing with her Pomeranian puppies and delicious food. So yeah, definitely a foodie like me. And so yeah, just want to welcome you, Kalia. Thank you so much for joining us, and definitely want to dive into, sharing with folks a little bit more about OWL and how your experience was engaging through the process of OWL.
Hey, y'all. Thank you so much for having me. First of all, for everyone here, FCYO, they are the squad, they're gang. The programming that they put on is so incredible. And the OWL Lab for us was really, really pivotal in our organizational growth. And so like JMO was saying, there's 3 parts. There's strategic education. So they have these really dope sessions that we went on to during the course of the program. And you know me, I love a little political education, but I come in like, oh, what we gonna do here? But their politics are on, right? I'm taking notes. My co-worker and colleague was also like, we had a collaborative notes document the whole time. And then we would take that information back to our staff space and, like basically rehash it with our group. And so, we had to figure out our system, like how are we going to what are we going to do with all this knowledge, and how are we going to carry it with us and not just leave it in the Zoom space. But strategic education, y'all, 100, to the point where we're actually taking some of the stuff that we've learned and including it in our own curriculum for some of our programming. So it's really powerful, strong stuff. And it allows us to sharpen kind of our approach to organizing, so that when we went into the assessment tasks, which if you're like me and you don't like tests, you're like, assessment, what? But it's not like a test, right? It's truly like assessing where your organization is and where you're trying to go. And I think as youth orgs, sometimes we don't even get the chance to like think of those things. We're just like in go, go, go. And so for VSPN, we were coming out of the 2020 height, right? We had just mobilized thousands of people. And we were trying to like, y'all hear my dogs in the back. But we were trying to come back to, what do we do now? We've been mobilizing, but we need to get back to organizing and having a long-term strategy. And so the assessment task really allowed us to kind of look into the mirror and see, where are we? How many people do we have? Who do we need to win? And what do we need to do to get there? And what the answers that we were starting to figure out really were painting a picture that has informed our strategy moving forward. And I would have to say that, and I might be getting ahead of myself, but the biggest lesson that we learned from those assessment tasks is that us as an org, we were just not thinking far out ahead enough. Which, of course, right? It's stuff happening. The world is literally burning and crumbling. So it's enough to battle, but to be able to have the space to scope out and say, hey, we do need to be thinking a little bit further out, has really impacted just the way we strategize. And the last piece is the debrief sessions. So it's other orgs in this cohort, right, that are also super amazing. Some of them are very similar to the work that you will do. Some of them are a little different. But what they did was they like broke us up into different little groups. And then we would have sessions where we talked through like our assessment tasks and just like what we was going through. Like I know me and my cohort group, it was a hard time last year trying to survive all of the ups and downs of organizing. So it was really nice to have like, we know we're gonna get on this Zoom call. These are my people. We've been talking and building trust. And now that we're actually in the second tier level up lab, we had our orientation yesterday, and I was looking around the Zoom room like, wait, that's my homie from that group. Oh, and so it's really cool to be able to build these connections that will, for some of them, turn long term. Virginia Student Power Network is a part of sibling org. So we have like Michigan Student Power Network, Florida, Maine. And in our cohorts, there was Maine, there was Florida. So not only were we on the Zoom together, but now we in the group chat jumping, right? So just to say, like, what you put into it is kind of what you get out. So if you just pop on the Zoom calls, that's cool, right? You're gonna get your money. fine. But what these folks are kind of offering is more, I think, than most grantees offer, because they are kind of putting a lot of work into the curriculum. They have like office hours. We would pop in and be like, yo, we working through this. What's your advice? And they're very available. So I do think that it's worthwhile, especially for orgs like us that we're kind of trying to work through like, what's the next step? How do we scale up? Or if you're newer and you're like, I'm just trying to figure this crap out, right? It's good to be in, like, there are orgs that were much bigger than us in our cohort. So sometimes it's like dreaming and scheming. It's like, oh, this is what it could be if we kept on this path. And so I know I've been talking for a minute, but those are the three components. And I do think, yeah, if y'all put energy into it and you build time into like if you have a paid staff, like if you build that time into your plan, it's really worthwhile and you can learn a lot.
Thank you. I love everything you said. And I really appreciate, you putting out there, like, one, you're a network, right? I know there's some orgs that are questioning like, hey, I'm a network. I work with all of these folks. Like, how is this going to work out? So curious how you communicated with your network, right? With the other folks to be like, hey, like, this is the organizational assessment task. We're going to do this because we have a commitment, but also where was that commitment coming from? Was it because like you and staff were like very, excited, or was it because like, hey, this is actually a space that we want to grow and grapple in? So yeah, just any kind of advice to the networks or alliances or coalitions that have been asking like, is OWL a place for me, or is OWL like the right thing for me to apply to?
It's a good question. And I think as you're applying, you should really, your group should think about where you're trying to go. And so for networks like us, we're still trying to independently incorporate. We're still figuring out our membership pipeline. So we had some specific questions or like areas of inquiry that we really wanted to dig into. And so I do think it's good to not be like, you don't got to know everything, right? But be a little specific in your goals of like, what are you trying to get out of this? And in terms of getting other people involved, I would say two things. One, like for us, while we were actually in the lab, we mostly engaged our staff in the assessments. But now we're taking those assessments and including our members, because part of our question was, how do we get our members involved in our decision-making process? And so we had to like figure that out with you all. And now we're starting to grapple with that more. And so if you're an org like us that doesn't have a formal decision-making process, or you're looking around and your young people not too close to it, or your most active people, then it is a good opportunity for you to like start to evaluate how those things could change. So it's all about like, what are you trying to interrogate, and using that space to interrogate it with others.
And then I'm curious, because I know you said you liked the strategic education session. Well, which one was your favorite one? Like the one that you're like, damn, mic drop, everybody. Like, I'm just curious, which one was it?
I can see the slide in my head. So, and I might be doing a lot here, right? But it's talking about power. And when like the whole thing, I think ours, it's called organizing to win. And like to think about organizing to win, it's like, well, what's the power to get there? And so, they're not gonna let you walk away without a few definitions of power, and then you break it down. But I think for us, what was most salient as organizers was, all right, if we want to say, I don't know, abolish the police, for example, what are all of the milestone victories that we need to do to get there? And kind of thinking about how to plan our campaigns that way. That was so huge for us, because we have all these huge transformative things that we want, but breaking it down and seeing the visuals, man, it's been really, really impactful for us.
I love it. I remember, I don't know what org brought it up, but they were like, we've been organizing on reaction mode, and it wasn't just them that brought it up. It was like, if something happened, we just organize it around that, but we didn't even know if what we're organizing against at that moment was getting us to our vision. We just were very reactive, and we didn't even know how we were making decisions around our campaign, because it's just so, impactful to our membership. But like, how do we connect what we're organizing with to a long-term vision, like you said? And so we were just like, wow, like, we didn't even know this was going to come up for folks when we dived into long-term agenda, or when we dived into like benchmark, wins or transformative wins. And so that was something that I remember came out of that session that you're talking about that was really impactful for a lot of orgs, because I mean, we're coming out of 2020, right? And like, now look at the aftermath that we're in. But yeah, any final words of wisdom to the next cohort, to the next the next owl?
I say, I mean, of course, be intentional with, applying as you always should, but do it, do it. If it's sounding like the things that we're saying are sounding like stuff that y'all are grappling with, I say even the application has good reflection questions. So I really do think it's worthwhile. And like I said earlier, I'll say it again, you get into it what you put into it. So once y'all hopefully get your acceptances and you're in, like they're gonna, give you this agenda. And at first you might be like, oh my God, what? No, I'm telling you, it's worth it. Make the time, find the people on your team that make sense to be on these things, and really ask questions. Because there were times where I was like, I don't know how I jive with this, or, oh, I'm not sure how this fits. I would just send a little email to Christopher June or JMO, and they'll respond right back. And I think that's what's really beautiful, because we as orgs create spaces for our members like this all the time. We're probably really good at it. That's why we're in this space. But it was kind of a switch for us to be like, all right, but what does it look like for us to show up fully into this space and actually grapple and learn? And then, of course, bringing it back. Because 2 people, 3 people, fine. But what does it look like to make a plan to bring it back to your group? And that type of intentionality will really, it can have some great gains. I mean, I'll say the last thing I'll say about our org is that we've completely like shifted our programming a bit since the cohort and brought in more people. So the numbers, like the actual impact is big. And so I really do think for even bigger orgs, I could see it being much more impactful for you all.
Cool. Thank you so much, Kalia. Appreciate talking to you, official talk host. And yeah, definitely would, just encourage folks to apply like Kalia said, and we're here to answer any questions. But thank you so much, Kalia. Appreciate it. We're going to transition into questions. So we'll go into a gallery view, and you could ask me questions, Kalia questions, Monica, Christopher June, questions about this cohort, so that you all have all the information you need to apply. So we'll go ahead and if you could use the raise hand so that it pushes your video or your like bubble to the front. And I know I'll check the chat just in case. Or any reflections. What's questions or reflections? We love reflections too, as you can tell. Let me hear from 2 folks, and then we'll go on. We have some questions that we could also share with you all. So Leslie, I see your beautiful face. Do you have any questions, reflections after hearing anything we've shared today?
Yeah, I was sitting here, I think you saw the wheels turning maybe, but I was trying to think how to frame the question. But in terms of so here's a little context. We are an organization that focuses on racial, economic, and ecological justice. We are doing organizing work, and one of our programs is our youth action team. Now the youth action team has like youth decision making and leadership within that team, but not exactly like through the rest of the organization. So does that, like, I guess I'm looking for a little clarity around like what what kind of like youth decision making and youth led power within the organization you're looking for.
Monica, do you want to answer this one? I can see your eyes look up.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, one, ideally within either an intergenerational or like a youth program within an organization, we would want those young people to be a part of a membership of the whole organization and have kind of an ability to have leadership in the organization overall. And we know that some orgs are building that. And so if that is something that you're curious about, and that young people actually do have meaningful decision-making roles at the very least in the campaigns that they're leading, like they can help determine and guide the campaign work of the organization, then I think that is also we'd be happy to accept a group like that.
Yeah, I think we're I guess to clarify a little bit, they are running their own campaigns. And so, but one of the things I think we're grappling with is how we integrate that within like the broader work of the organization. It's not like we don't have
It's not just you,
they're
there's
on the board or something, but like it would be great to have that. Like, so that's kind of an open question for us.
It is a live question for many groups and many of our cohorts. The intergenerational leading is certainly a live question for a lot of groups. So you'll be in good company.
Cool. I know we have a list of questions that we've come up with that are also in the RFP. So Jen, if you want to share that slide and we can go over those. And if any questions also come up as we're talking about these, feel free to throw those in the chat. So can past grantees apply? Yes, past grantees that have gone through other cohort-based initiatives that we've had in the past. Groups that are in current cohorts that are currently running, we definitely have like a word of caution, and also we're really giving priority to groups that have not rocked with FCYO before. And so if you're in one of our groups called Yo Care, definitely want to preface that, one, what's a red flag is capacity. And two is that, funding dollars could be more spread out to also other orgs. But go ahead, Monica.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I wouldn't waste your time. We're not gonna, if you're already in Yo Care, Level Up Lab, or Praxis for Power, we won't accept groups into OWL that are already getting funded and getting support from us through another cohort. And so I wouldn't want anybody to fill out the application with the hope that you'll be considered, because as JMO mentioned, we really do want to make sure we're bringing as many organizations into our network and getting resources out to as many groups as possible.
And then do networks and affiliates, fill out the application together. We definitely want to encourage that organizations or like the affiliates apply and name their network. This is key for us so that we know, and it's also just because this cohort's small, it's 25. It can't be all of the affiliates from what network, but we definitely want to make sure, again, like just the equity of funding. And I mentioned this before around preferences. So definitely giving preference to organizations that are Indigenous led, Black led, and organizations located in historically underfunded regions. Monica, did you want to add anything to that one, the networks and affiliates? What we mean by emerging and new in the application process is if 5 years and younger, or if your youth program in an intergenerational organization is 5 years and younger. So that's what we mean when we say like emerging, new. The last cohort had a lot of new organizations that were established, I want to say like either 2019 or 2020, some 2018, or more established organizations that have been established since the 90s, who are just integrating a youth organizing program. And so definitely we consider that also to be like new and emerging, because as part of our name, Funders Collaborative on Youth Organizing, we're trying to get capacity resources to youth-led work. Do you have to be in the first tier to get into the second and the third? Yes, they build off one another, and I could pass it to Christopher June as to why this one's pretty important.
Yeah, so when we opened up Level Up Lab, we opened it up for participants who'd been in the first OWL, like Virginia Student Power Network, and folks who've been in the Youth Power Lab and Pipelines to Power, in part because there is a foundational level of strategic education, but also a foundational and demonstrated capacity for accurate assessment and like vulnerability about practice as sort of a prerequisite for being able to engage in tiers 2 and 3. And so when we open tiers 2 and 3 back up, it will be open to graduates from the OWL programming who have demonstrated, alignment with the strategic framework, ability to engage with that sort of activity, but also ability to, in the peer learning space, actually engage in struggle and demonstrate a capacity for vulnerability. So in order to build sort of the capacities of the Power to Win framework and live sort of in this stage of organizational transformation, those are sort of necessities. And so that's why we've built it out in tiers that are like nesting dolls.
And just to thought, by tiers, we're talking about the Level Up Lab and the Praxis for Power Lab. So to get into those cohorts, you have to start here.
And then question 5, is there a particular issue area focus for organizing Twin Lab? No, we're welcoming all issue areas that folks are working on. We also have part of the application is a list, a robust list, and then there's also space to add if we're missing any issue area. So folks definitely welcome folks that are working on education or housing or abolishing prisons. So definitely climate. So we definitely want to know what issues y'all are working on. And like Kalia had mentioned, we definitely want to craft like even smaller breakout groups where folks have like similarities, but also differences to learn from one another. And so that's the reason why we ask some of these questions in the application process as to what issue areas y'all are working on. But there's no particular focus. We welcome all issue areas. And then what resources are available to learn more about this grant making program? I know Kel has been super awesome in dropping in links. And so we'll go ahead and drop in some more links around like either readings or other web pages, resources that you all could refer to, whether it's the points of alignment that we dropped in the link earlier, or our definition of youth organizing that Monica dropped in earlier. We'll definitely send those out as well. Thank you, Kel. Yeah, any questions before we close out? All right, cool. Thank you everyone so much for joining. Thank you, Kalia. Thank you, FCYO staff. Really excited to read your applications. Really excited for the next cohort. And best if folks have questions or would like to reach out or have want to build a little bit more clarity. Jen, if you could share the last slide. This is our contact information. Feel free to contact me. I will make myself thank you for dropping in the chat. Definitely make myself available to answer any questions to best equip y'all with the necessary information to put your best foot forward. And so just remember the deadline is the 31st.